Malaysia's government spent 23.4 billion ringgit, over $6 billion, rescuing its national airline, only to watch it keep losing money year after year. In 2018, that perpetually unprofitable flag carrier accounted for half of Khazanah's $1.5 billion losses. Somehow, in the world's fastest-growing air travel market, Asia's national airlines are financially circling the drain. This is the flag carrier trap, when national pride meets hard market reality. Despite Asia's air travel boom, many state-owned airlines, from Thai Airways to Malaysia Airlines to Garuda Indonesia, have spent the past decade in a tailspin of debt, bailouts, and even bankruptcy filings. It's a story of golden handcuffs, a pincer movement of competition, and some very painful medicine that's now on the menu. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is a flag carrier? In aviation, it's essentially a country's national airline, often state-owned or state-supported, that carries the national flag on its tail. The term dates back to the 1940s, when the new International Civil Aviation Organization let every nation set up its own international airline. Many governments chose to establish, subsidize, and protect these airlines, literally flying the flag abroad, while others, like the US, left the job to private companies. In practice, a flag carrier isn't just a business. It's seen as an extension of national policy or prestige. These airlines were given names, imagery, and missions tied to their home country's identity. But here's the irony. Asia-Pacific's skies have been booming. In 2019, this region carried roughly 1.5 billion airline passengers, about 36% of all global traffic, making it the largest air travel market on Earth. And it's nowhere near finished. Passenger numbers in Asia-Pacific are projected to double by 2043, far outpacing growth in Europe or North America. In other words, demand isn't the problem. Rapid economic growth, a rising middle class, and thriving tourism have made air travel in Asia more accessible than ever. So why does this matter now? Because even with those tailwinds, many of Asia's flagship airlines have been bleeding red ink. Some hit crises in the 2010s, others were floored by the pandemic in 2020 and had to seek court-supervised restructurings. In the past 5 years, at least a half-dozen major Asian carriers, Thai Airways, Malaysia Airlines, Garuda Indonesia, Philippine Airlines, even low-cost long-haul AirAsia X, all entered bankruptcy protection or massive debt rehab. Taxpayers have footed enormous bills to bail them out. And now, post-COVID, these airlines face a fork in the road: drastic reform or possible extinction. Understanding the flag carrier trap isn't just academic. It's about what happens next to some of the most recognizable names in aviation. To understand the trap, we need to see how it was set. Many Asian flag carriers were founded in the post-colonial mid-20th century, often with government backing and grand ambitions. Thai Airways, for example, was launched in 1960 as a joint venture with SAS, Scandinavia's airline, then taken over by the Thai government to become a source of national prestige. Malaysia Airlines traces its roots to the 1940s, evolving into a Malaysia-Singapore joint airline, and then splitting in 1972 when each country formed its own national carrier. Garuda Indonesia was established in 1949, literally named by the country's first president after the mystical Garuda bird, a symbol of Indonesia itself. These airlines weren't just companies, they were strategic instruments of nation-building, connecting remote regions, flying international routes to put the country on the map, and showcasing the flag abroad. In those early decades, flag carriers enjoyed a protected paradise. Governments often restricted competition on key routes so that their airline would dominate. International flights operated on bilateral agreements that often named one flag carrier per country. That meant, for a long time, if you wanted to fly from, say, Bangkok to London, Thai Airways was essentially the default, and maybe the only non-stop option. The flag carriers had monopolies or preferred status on profitable routes, state support when needed, and a loyal base of travelers who had few alternatives. This setup was the golden part of the golden handcuffs. It brought growth and glory. For decades, many flag carriers prospered, or at least broke even. In fact, Thai Airways remained profitable for nearly 4 decades following its founding, rarely dipping into the red until the 2008 crisis, a consistency that became a point of pride in Thailand's history books. But the other half of that equation is the handcuffs. In exchange for protection and prestige, these airlines had to serve multiple masters and goals other than profit. They were expected to fly unprofitable routes for political reasons. For example, maintaining flights to distant regions or foreign capitals just for diplomacy or national presence. They became large employers, sometimes overstaffed at the behest of governments keen to provide jobs, and they turned into vehicles for political patronage. As one analyst quipped, national airlines proved ideal platforms for patronage in many countries, meaning politically connected individuals might get top jobs, juicy contracts, or favors, regardless of whether it made business sense. This often led to bloated cost structures and inefficiencies that a normal private airline would cut. For example, Malaysia Airlines, MAS, through the 1980s and 1990s expanded to dozens of international cities: London, Paris, Los Angeles, Buenos Aires, you name it, even if some of those routes lost money consistently. Why? Because being seen in New York or flying to South America was a statement of Malaysia's global ambition. Similarly, Thai Airways added routes far beyond what a carrier its size might sustain, at one point flying to New York and Los Angeles non-stop from Bangkok, ultra-long-haul flights with questionable profitability. The mission was partly commercial, but largely political. Show the world Thailand's reach, bring pride to Thai people, and perhaps bolster tourism and trade links. Profitability took a back seat. The strategic importance of these carriers also made governments very reluctant to let them fail, or even shrink. In Malaysia, after a failed attempt to privatize MAS in the 1990s left it with crippling debt, the government renationalized the airline in 2001 and kept propping it up. Between 2001 and 2014, the Malaysian government injected 17.4 billion ringgit, approximately $4.4 billion, to cover MAS's losses. That's on top of the 6 billion ringgit bailout in 2014, an enormous spend for a country of Malaysia's size. Why keep paying? Because we must have our national airline, insisted one former prime minister, reflecting a widespread sentiment. It's national pride and connectivity, priceless until you see the price tag. Meanwhile, in Thailand, Thai Airways remained majority government-owned and was classified as a state enterprise, which carried its own baggage. Under Thai law, being a state-owned company meant rigid rules on management and labor that private firms don't face. For instance, Thai Airways had less flexibility in hiring, firing, and salary decisions. Any major moves could be tangled in bureaucracy. These were like golden handcuffs. The airline had government backing, but also had its hands tied when it needed to modernize or cut costs. In fact, it got to the point where Thai Airways intentionally had to give up its state enterprise status in 2020, by the finance ministry selling a small stake and dropping government ownership below 51%, just so it could enter a more agile restructuring process. Essentially, to survive, Thai had to unlock its handcuffs by saying, "We're not officially state-run anymore." Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, many flag carriers also had to contend with powerful unions and workforces that expected government-level job security and benefits. Cutting staff or salaries, normal steps in a business downturn, could become political landmines. In some cases, laws or political pressure outright forbade big layoffs. These carriers were often seen as too important to fail, and by extension, too important to slim down. Over time, that contributed to high operating costs and slower decision-making. A private airline might quickly cancel an unpopular route or retire an inefficient plane model. A flag carrier might hesitate if that route served a political interest or that plane purchase involved someone's political patronage deal. But, as in any good story, there was a twist coming. The golden age of the flag carrier was about to meet the turbulence of liberalization and competition. The very forces that made air travel boom in Asia, open markets, new technology, rising consumer demand, would challenge these legacy airlines in ways they never saw coming. Around the turn of the millennium, two big shifts hit Asia's airline industry like a monsoon storm. The first was market liberalization and the rise of low-cost carriers. The second was the ascent of powerful Middle Eastern super-connector airlines. Together, these changes dramatically altered the market dynamics, a midpoint turning point that raised the stakes for flag carriers everywhere. Let's talk about the low-cost carrier, LCC revolution first. In the late 1990s, inspired by the success of Southwest in the US and Ryanair in Europe, entrepreneurs in Asia began launching their own budget airlines. They had a simple but potent formula: no frills, lower fares, point-to-point service. In Southeast Asia, a pivotal moment was 2001, when Tony Fernandes bought a tiny failing carrier, also named AirAsia, and relaunched it as a true low-cost airline out of Malaysia. "Now everyone can fly" became its slogan, and it was transformative. Within a decade, AirAsia and its affiliates in Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, etc., were carrying tens of millions of passengers who previously could not afford flying or had very limited choices. In 2018, low-cost carriers had captured over 50% of all airline seat capacity in Southeast Asia, dominating half the market. In Malaysia, AirAsia alone seized roughly 55% of the domestic market by 2018, vaulting ahead of the venerable Malaysia Airlines on its own home turf. Think about that. The upstart, scrappy private airline took more than half the market, effectively sidelining the old flag carrier in its own home. In fact, AirAsia Group was on track to become the largest airline in Southeast Asia around that time, surpassing giants like Singapore Airlines and Thai Airways. The effect on the legacy carriers was devastating. These nimble, low-cost airlines undercut fares on short-haul and medium-haul routes, bread and butter for the flag carriers' regional networks. Passengers flocked to the lower prices and often newer planes and more direct routes the LCCs offered. And it wasn't just the price. The brand image of flying had shifted. The upstarts marketed themselves as young, fun, and friendly. Now everyone can fly, versus the older, stuffier image of some flag carriers. As one commentary noted, these younger airlines were often better advertisements for their countries than the fusty rivals they displaced. Crucially, these budget carriers didn't carry the same baggage. They weren't instruments of national policy, they were private businesses focused on profit. They had no qualms about cutting costs or routes that didn't work. They also had no mandate to fly to prestigious but unprofitable destinations for politics' sake. So while a flag carrier might stubbornly keep flying half-empty planes to Europe or maintain too many staff, the new competitors optimized every penny. That difference started to show in the bottom lines. Where MAS or Thai accumulated losses, AirAsia was often posting profits, at least pre-2020, and expanding. Now, the second part of the pincer: Middle Eastern giants. Starting in the 2000s, airlines like Emirates, Dubai, Qatar Airways, Doha, and Etihad, Abu Dhabi, began aggressively expanding their fleets and global networks. They turned their Gulf cities into major hubs connecting Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond. For travelers from Asia going to Europe, or vice versa, the Gulf carriers offered a new option. Instead of flying, say, Thai Airways from Bangkok to Frankfurt, direct, or via a traditional stop, one could often get a cheaper fare and luxurious service by flying Emirates with a connection in Dubai. This was a huge shift. Suddenly, Bangkok-London or Jakarta-Paris passengers didn't need to rely on their home carrier or a European airline. They could go via Doha or Dubai. The Gulf airlines, often bankrolled by oil-rich states and run with a hyper-competitive ethos, poured on capacity. State-of-the-art wide-body planes. Think A380s and 777s, multiple flights a day, glossy marketing about their service quality. They didn't have significant home markets. Dubai and Doha themselves are small cities, so they specialized in carrying everyone else's traffic, the ultimate super connector model. For Asia's legacy carriers, this was an unexpected punch from above. They found their long-haul routes to Europe and North America undercut. Take Thai Airways as an example. Thai traditionally ferried Thai and other Southeast Asian travelers to Europe via its Bangkok hub. But by the 2010s, those travelers could as easily fly Emirates via Dubai, which might offer more frequencies and competitive fares. The Thai Airways CEO even publicly questioned if Gulf hubs were truly better for Asian passengers than Bangkok, implicitly acknowledging how transit traffic was bleeding away to the Middle East. Commentators responded with skepticism. One noted that Emirates' Dubai hub had plenty of demand, and that Dubai-Bangkok local traffic was mostly driven from the Gulf side, highlighting how Thai had lost ground. The market dynamics shifted radically. Flag carriers that had counted on higher-yield business travelers or tourists on their long routes now faced pressure on fares and load factors. Many travelers didn't mind an extra stop in exchange for saving a few $100s, especially if that stop was in a plush new airport with fancy lounges. The Gulf carriers, effectively subsidized by their state's deep pockets, or at least with state help on infrastructure and favorable conditions, could afford thin margins or losses to gain market share. Asian national airlines, by contrast, were stuck with higher costs and now lower revenue. By the mid-2010s, these forces, low-cost carriers in regional markets and Gulf plus emerging Turkish carriers in long-haul, squeezed Asia's flag carriers from both ends. A former monopoly like Malaysia Airlines suddenly found itself attacked on short flights by AirAsia and on London or Sydney flights by Emirates and Qatar. This was the pincer movement. Picture the flag carriers caught in the middle. On one side, nimble low-cost airlines nibbling away at domestic and short routes. On the other, heavyweight foreign airlines taking the intercontinental crown jewels. The result? Shrinking market share and mounting losses. Yields, the fare per passenger kilometre, dropped as competition intensified. Some flag carriers tried to fight back by cutting fares, but that often just produced ruinous price wars that they were ill-equipped to win. Government support sometimes encouraged these price wars, as seen with Air India historically, a sense that we must compete at any cost, leading to irrational discounting. Of course, that just bled the airline further. Let's address a counter-argument here. Isn't it possible for a flag carrier to thrive, even in this environment? After all, Singapore Airlines, SIA, is a flag carrier and is often cited as one of the world's best-run and profitable airlines. Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong, pre-2020 turmoil, also did comparatively well. And the Middle East carriers themselves are national airlines of their respective states, yet they rapidly grew. So is the flag carrier trap truly inevitable? Well, the successes tend to prove the rule by exception. Singapore Airlines, for instance, has significant government ownership, Temasek Holdings, but is run with a very commercial mindset. The government does not micromanage its operations or burden it with excess staff or political routes. SIA also innovated. It started its own LCC subsidiaries, Scoot for long-haul low-cost, Tiger Air previously for short-haul, essentially choosing to compete with itself rather than cede the budget market. And Singapore's geography as a small city-state meant SIA always had to focus on international connecting traffic to survive, a bit like a Gulf carrier model. But they did so with excellent service and brand, carving out a profitable niche even as competition rose. In short, Singapore Airlines shows that a flag carrier can succeed if it's given the freedom to run like a private business, invest in product, and adapt to market changes. It's an outlier because not many state-owned airlines have that combination of discipline and support without interference. Meanwhile, the Gulf carriers succeed partly because their governments treat them as strategic growth engines, willing to invest heavily and accept lower profits in exchange for broader economic gains, like making Dubai or Doha global hubs. They had a blank slate, building airlines in the 1980s/90s without legacy inefficiencies, and they benefited from being at a geographically advantageous crossroads. In contrast, an airline like Thai or MAS had decades of legacy decisions, unions, and national obligations to unwind. It's a lot harder to turn a ship than to start a new speedboat. So yes, not every flag carrier was doomed, but those that survived tended to either reinvent themselves or operate in very favorable conditions. Unfortunately, by the late 2010s, carriers like Thai Airways, Malaysia Airlines, Garuda Indonesia, Philippine Airlines, and others were, for lack of a better word, stuck. Their losses piled up, even as the region's passenger numbers kept growing. Something had to give, and it did, with the crisis that hit in 2020. By the end of the 2010s, the consequences were stark. Malaysia Airlines, MAS, taken private in 2014, failed its restructuring goals spectacularly. By 2018, losses were so severe the Prime Minister floated shutting it down. Desperation was palpable. The airline had already exhausted every option, from a 2006 spiritual pivot where a CEO hired a feng shui master to massive staff cuts. Yet the red ink kept flowing. By 2019, MAS was a smaller regional airline with an unsustainable legacy cost base, facing an ultimatum: find a buyer or face the end. Thai Airways similarly lurched into crisis, posting losses nearly every year after 2012. By 2020, it was insolvent with $5.8 billion in debt. The government finally chose bankruptcy court-supervised rehabilitation over endless bailouts. Garuda Indonesia was in equally dire straits, caught massaging accounts in 2018 to hide losses. With over $10 billion in debt, it eventually defaulted, telling courts it could only survive by cutting its fleet in half. Other carriers, from Philippine Airlines to Sri Lankan, faced similar reckonings. The flag carrier trap had sprung. These airlines couldn't adapt due to legacy burdens. In contrast, Singapore Airlines, SIA, stood as a regional counterexample. SIA felt the competition but leveraged its premium reputation and Changi hub proactively. When the pandemic hit, government support provided liquidity without dictating operations, allowing SIA to emerge competitive while others flatlined. By 2019, the reality was painful. Many flag carriers were shells of their former selves, kept alive only by national sentiment. COVID-19 was the existential crisis that forced governments to stop writing blank checks. Thai Airways slashed its workforce by half and trimmed its fleet from 100 to roughly 70 aircraft, retiring gas-guzzling jumbos. It eliminated first class and refocused on efficient routes. The result? By 2023, Thai recorded continuous operating profits, shedding its golden handcuffs for a chance at sustainable survival. Malaysia Airlines used the pandemic to force creditors into haircuts and cut leases. The new, leaner MAS is almost a boutique version of its old self. In 2023, it reported its first annual profit in over a decade, approximately $170 million. By carrying 14.5 million passengers with a lower cost base, the airline finally became right-sized for profitability rather than chasing global prestige. Garuda Indonesia likewise cut its fleet from 142 to about 60 aircraft. It cancelled orders for new jets and pivoted to profitable domestic routes, abandoning its global five-star ambitions to simply stay alive and rebuild trust. Will these fixes stick? Demand is roaring back, and governments are currently insisting on business discipline. However, caution is necessary. Old habits like political meddling and prestige expansion could resurface. Post-2020, airlines are adapting by exploring partnerships, like Thai and SIA, investing in cargo, and strengthening low-cost subsidiaries. The hope is that the shock therapy has reset these carriers. They may never be the global giants they once aspired to be, but they can be healthy. A smaller, profitable airline is better than a collapsed one.